Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dave Emmons Strange Reality Show. I have a guest today that I was just joking with him a while ago. I've been with him several times on the air, and we've been on several different shows. But I can just about throw any topic at him, and it sticks. It's like you throw something that'll stick to the wall. Well, he knows the topics. We go into politics, but we're going to kind of back off a little bit on the politics, a little bit on this show. So this is we're not networking with anybody right now. This is just the Dave Emmons Show, Strange Reality, and we're going to do a potpourri of subjects as we go. We'll probably divide this into two segments. First segment an hour, and then we'll break, and then we'll do another segment. And that's how we'll put it that way. So it'll help, I guess, people keep up with a lot of the stuff that David does. This guy is amazing. David White. He studied at Northwestern University, and he was lucky to study briefly with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and everybody would love to have that privilege. The noted Project Blue Book astronomer and UFO researcher. Since then, he's written numerous screenplays. I read some of his writing. His his writing. I've written 3 books, and I'm on my 4th one. But he gets into some really colorful grammar, almost like English literature, and it's just really great. He does novels and short stories, and authored research papers on UFOs, the Pentagon UAP videos, and we're going to be talking about that in the opening, and ancient archaeology, megalithic architecture, military and political history, the metaverse, the Ark of the Covenant, and Renaz La Chateau and the Knights Templar. See, I told you. Yeah. Okay. You got. Yeah. Okay. David is an experiencer. Like sometimes I just crunch up these words and I try to spit them out. These French words. I need to learn French, but I'm too old for that. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, David. David is an experiencer with UFOs and ETs because of what he's witnessed in his own life. He can say with complete certainty that yes, paranormal experiences do exist, that our planet is indeed being visited by non-terrestrial intelligence, and that time travel, at least through psychic or dreamlike means, is not only possible but probable more common than what we realize. And David White, you have anything to add or say what you're doing? I know you're doing some writing for YouTube, and you're talking about Russia, Ukraine, and you're doing a lot. We'll talk about that soon too. But I think the first subject you wanted to get into is a disclosure. What's new going on with you, David White?
What's new? There's always new things. And yes, you can teach old dogs new tricks.
Oh, you
That's
can.
yes, old dogs can learn lots of new things. So
Okay.
can old dogs. Right now, I've been working with a couple of YouTube channels. One is infographics, and the other one's the military channel. I write scripts for them primarily on the Ukraine war, but pretty much any military or foreign policy subject. Whether we're going to get involved with a war with China over Taiwan in the near future, how NATO is going to accept new countries like Finland and Sweden, and how soon Ukraine will be admitted. But the thing that I think we should talk about today that I mentioned earlier was that there is going to be a congressional subcommittee hearing next Wednesday, the 26th.
Yeah.
We're not sure who the guests are going to be because they haven't said who the guests are going to be. And they haven't actually said where they're going to hold this. It's not clear whether they're going to hold it in Washington or somewhere else. So there's a lot of questions still left about this. More recently this year, there is a new purported whistleblower by the name of David Grush, rhymes with thrush. He claims, so this guy has a very storied background. He's a veteran. He's worked with the National Reconnaissance Office. He has been a liaison between certain branches of the government and certain UAP investigative groups. He himself makes it clear he's not seen any UFOs or any alien wreckage or any alien bodies himself. Everything he's going on is what's been handed to him or been told to him by other people. So that limits his connection with the experience itself. And before we get too far into the UFO subject, I want to state clearly from the beginning, I totally believe in UFOs. The reason I do is because I've witnessed two of them with my three children on two different occasions. These were not airplanes, these were not Chinese lanterns, these were not balloons, these were not helicopters, these were not drones. They were truly unidentified. At one point, there were two lights that looked like landing lights from a 747 at the edge of our driveway in the middle of nowhere in rural Indiana. The nearest house is more than a block away, and the nearest city is about 3 miles away. This thing just appeared right over our driveway with a cornfield behind it, that it's just inexplicable. This thing was absolutely like spotlight intensity brilliance, two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids saw it. We went outside, and from the one moment that I went from one side of a 6-foot diameter maple tree to the other, it blinked out. No sound, no whoosh, no motor sounds. These were not drones. These were not anything that we could normally describe. So either our military has the ability to essentially teleport away from somebody's house in the middle of nowhere just to say hello, or these are non-human intelligences who will present themselves to us when they feel like it and disappear just as quickly.
Yeah. Well,
So,
you know, I'm a believer, David. I've written a book on UFOs, but I wanted to. Here's something else. I've been. You might have heard me here. Heard me mention this. I have a problem with the talking heads. We're talking about people like Richard Dolan and Daryl Sims and Linda Moulton Hall, and also I guess this guy uh, that I guess he introduced this guy. Who was it? The Robert or Bob something that uh, he told on Area 51, and
Bob Lazar.
yeah, and Bob Lazar, not him especially as a talking head. He's more of a grunt as far as information is concerned. But you're talking about George Knapp. He come out, and several of them have come out and said, "Okay, now we have military pilots, we have commercial pilots, we have the military, we have police, and they are the most reliable witnesses, and they're saying that now we can actually depend on some real truth, like they're saying the Joe on the street, like you and me. I don't know if you're included. You probably know a little bit about writing for military, so they might trust you more than they would me. Apparently we are not trusted. I've been in the military. I had top secret, but I was never trained for UFOs. And you just talked about this David Grush. I know you can talk more about it, but Mick West, I watched a little bit of the YouTube you told me to watch, and he has no documents and no pictures, as you were alluding to a while ago. Okay, what's the problem here, David? Are people trying to like make us all this look crazy that see and hear these things?
well, there's 3 or 4 problems, maybe 5, involved in UFO experience. Number one, it seems to have been something connected with humans since deep back in our past. The Sumerians had legends of these beings that came out of the sky. The
Mm-hmm.
whole family of gods idea that you see in Greek mythology, that you see in Norse mythology, in Roman mythology, all of that came from the Sumerians. We used to think that the Sumerians got these ideas around 4000 BC because we used to think that was the beginning of civilization,
Mm-hmm.
and that civilization started in multiple places around the world: South America, the Indus Valley in India, China, and in both the Egyptian Valley and the Tigris Euphrates region where Sumeria was. We thought they all started roughly around 4000 BC, and that was the beginning of what we call now modern civilization, except we've since found these sites in southeastern Turkey, the most famous of which is Göbekli Tepe, and that has been carbon dated to around 10,000 or earlier BC. That's 6,000 years prior to the Sumerians. Okay, so now we have to step back and say, well, maybe what the Sumerians are talking about is a long buried tradition of legends that they have from 6,000 years prior. Okay, so that's problem number one. This thing may have been going on for 10 or 12 and a half thousand years. Problem number two is we now have a military whose vested interest is getting paid to protect us from threats. And if they can make us think that aliens are a threat, they will get paid to protect us. But that leads to problem three. If these things really are from another dimension or another planet system, and they're so much further advanced than us that our military can't protect us, then our military doesn't want us to know that they're in our airspace, because then we'll tell our military, why aren't you protecting us? So the military, and I'll usually use the term the Pentagon, because that's the forward facing branch of the military industrial complex that the United States has over us. The Pentagon is walking a tightrope between wanting to get paid more money to investigate UFOs, while also not wanting us to think that they can't protect us, which leads into the Phoenix Lights event, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And it also comes against this Pentagon desire to make the Chinese and the Russians, our current adversaries, believe that we've back engineered UFO technology so that maybe they won't get us into a war. Because as much as the Pentagon likes to make money off of other people's wars, they don't want a war in America. They don't want to fight on our territory. It's okay to fight in Iraq or Iran or, God forbid, Ukraine, but they don't want to fight here because our infrastructure would be damaged, and they don't want that to happen to them. So there's another problem too, that the people like you and me who want answers can be best summed up by the poster from the X-Files TV show, which had a UFO. I think it was the Billy Myers UFO, which they didn't get permission to use. So after the first couple of seasons, they had to change the image of the UFO in the background to one that they could use. And the slogan at the bottom is not, I want the truth. The slogan is not, I want the facts. The slogan is, I want to believe. And that's the problem. We humans, especially those of us interested in the paranormal or UFOs, we don't want the truth. We want to believe. And if you see how popular TV shows are that deal with paranormal events and mystery and things like that, that's because people want to believe those things are real, and they want that kind of feedback. You mentioned Mick West talking about David Grush. Mick West has been hammered repeatedly online, all the different social media branches, because he tries to provide what he believes is the truth. Mick isn't really an expert on UFOs, but he has a really solid understanding of photography and photographic effects. He went through back in 2017 when the first 5 UAP videos were sort of kind of released with the Pentagon's approval. It's more convoluted than that, but we can pigeonhole it there for now. When those first 5 videos came out, he was able to point out how each one of those was not unexplained in any way, shape, or form. And he won't go as far as I will go. I go a little further than him. I will say that the Pentagon knowingly allowed these to be released, knowing that they weren't UAPs or UFOs, that they had a logical, mundane explanation, yet the Pentagon wanted to have these out there so that people would discuss it and take care of 2 of their previous problems, making the Chinese and Russians think that we've back engineered these craft, and also muddying the waters about what is really unidentified and what is not. Each one of those UAP videos had a totally logical, clear explanation, and Mick West was one of the first people that came up and explained and actually duplicated how some of these things work. The gimbal video, for example, he was able to show that if you used your cell phone camera and a lighter, you could duplicate the exact same effect that you're seeing in that gimbal video. And he was also able to show that when the plane moved, the video was trying to track where this object was until a point where it couldn't track any longer. Then it had to turn upside down to keep focused on it. And that's when the gimbal object seemed to flip over in itself. And it's a clearly technical thing that happens with the gimbal IR feed on those craft that the Pentagon obviously absolutely knew was the cause of that effect, and yet they kept quiet.
Right.
He,
I watched this. Yeah, Mick West. He's supposed to be a great journalist. He has a lot of connections. That's probably part of his background.
not a journalist. He's like you and me. He's a researcher, but he is very knowledgeable where it comes to photography and infrared. One of the videos that they released was this. They call it the pyramid video, where there are all these diamond-shaped objects in a green background, in a green effect, that supposedly were photographed by the military. Well, the truth was there was a military person who was using their cell phone camera to record these objects at night. And some of them have flashing FAA avoidance beacons going off, except they're all looking like diamonds. And the reason for that is because of the aperture on your camera. When it shuts down with basically flat sides so that it'll shut down into a small little diamond. He duplicated that with his camera too. And the Pentagon knew this. They had to have absolutely known that's what this was. They never denied the authenticity of the videos as per being taken by military personnel, but they never actually said this was taken by military personnel on duty or using military technology. The green triangle one, the green pyramid one, was obviously a cell phone. It wasn't any advanced technology.
So actually, the military exposing this stuff, and also you have the talking heads that it could be working both sides too. And what's going on is we're being discredited as experiencers on the street, and then they're saying, okay, let's point to the military, commercial pilots, and the police, and we'll get real information from them. But the people on the street, we can't believe them half the time. And
well,
is there a purpose for that, David?
Yeah, part of the problem is, and we've noticed this in courtrooms, first person testimony is often wholly unreliable, absolutely, completely unreliable. You can get, there's, famous movies. I think there's one done by Akira Kurosawa, who's a Japanese director, where it shows 7 different perceptions of the same event, of a crime. Mm-hmm. And each one of them has a different perspective and sees different things, because we as humans, we will do that. We will, we have this fear of dark rooms, because when we go into a dark room, we aren't reacting to what we see. We react to what we're afraid we're going to see. And as humans, we've developed that for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, because at night or in dark caves, there are predators lurking, and we will be afraid of what we think might be there. Mm-hmm. And when we see things, our brains will fill in the details that we don't normally see. Go up and look at, get 10 people to look at cloud formations, and you'll get 10 different, perceptions of what that cloud formation is, because those brains are filling in what those people want to see.
Right.
So average people will have an average level of accuracy, and we need something better than an average level of accuracy. I know you and I have had our own experiences, but there's no way we can prove to somebody else what those experiences are. And I was at a
well, you had your kids as witnesses, and I've had witnesses in half of my observations.
But we can't duplicate that. What really works, and let's get into some. So there's I want to get to the last thing. The last problem we have is there is money to be made talking about UFOs to the world public. And that means you now will have people who will say anything, not just to make money, but just to become popular. Mm-hmm. I was at a MUFON meeting held at Starved Rock in Illinois back in 2017. There were about 40 of us at this meeting with a couple of high-level MUFON.
I've been there too, Sam Moranto. Yeah, Sam Moranto.
Yeah, great guy. Mm-hmm. They had brought a guy from Southern Illinois up who had claimed he had had a dozen UFO experiences, including being able to go underneath one as it was hovering, and he could feel the vibration and stuff. There was another person of the 40 that I had driven down to see this presentation with. This guy claimed he had worked for a company that subcontracted work for the CIA. I don't know if he did or not, but that was his story. This guy and I, when we started watching this presenter, we could tell he was doing a bit. He was doing some kind of presentation in front of an audience as if he had been prepared, as if he had been taught or had practiced how to get a response from everybody. The other 38 people were just like almost hypnotized by this guy. And me and my friend are looking at each other like, how can they be believing this? And it just seemed completely unbelievable. I mean, we were stunned that anybody took this guy seriously.
Were you
And I
were you
attributed this
taking?
to,
Was it coming from his heart, or did he show fear or anything, or
oh,
nothing?
he was laughing and cracking jokes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And as soon as he started cracking jokes, I was like, oh, this guy's, he's got a bit. He's prepared this.
Right.
Okay. So this gets into the whole, I want to believe mentality that we have, but it's also taken over by the hucksters and the hoaxers. I could mention the three biggest in our lifetime, which would be David Wilcock,
Good. Corey Good.
Corey, what's his name,
Corey Good.
and
Yeah.
and and their idea was back around, I think it was 2015. Corey Good, sorry. They were claiming that two big stories. One of them was that there was a Jupiter-sized UFO flying through our solar system, crewed and piloted by blue avians. Okay, blue avian creatures.
Right.
Came out right after Avatar, and they basically piggybacked off that idea. The Jupiter-sized object that they claimed was taken, had pictures taken of it, was a single glitch on one of the solar observatories that's designed to show us pictures of the solar corona. And if there's an error, you'll see a little block that looks like a cube, except it's probably equivalent to the size of Mercury if you were taking a picture of it and if it wasn't just a technological anomaly. And they claimed that was evidence that there was a Jupiter-sized object flying through the solar system, despite the fact that if we had another Jupiter-sized planet careening through our solar system, every single planet and every single asteroid and meteor and comet would be perturbed to the point that it would be like throwing a boulder into a pond. And none of that
David,
ever.
you didn't mention Billy Meyer. Is he also?
Yeah, Billy Meyer has had some shade cast upon his claims, not the least of which is the fact that when he sold his house, the new buyers found one of the models that he was using to take pictures of stored in the rafters that apparently Billy Meyer forgot that he left there. So yeah, in fact, one of the things you can look for is there's a video he did early on, back when we had 16mm cameras, where he shows a UFO circling a pine tree, like going around on a railroad track.
Right.
And it's so badly done that you can see the tree like shaking, like it's hitting the branches as it goes around. They've tried to take that off of the internet. But once you see that, you'll realize, oh, he's just making this stuff up. And yet there are people who believe him because they want to believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I
so
had
let's,
his manager on my show one time about a year ago. I can't think of his name. It's Robert or something. Uh, it was his marketing manager, and he got a lot of hits. A lot of people were interested in what he had to say, but like you said, there's a lot of people who have negative words to say about that Billy Maher incidents. Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Okay. So in 2017, there's this group called To the Stars Academy, TTSA,
Yeah.
and they were given the first three UAP videos from a media guy in California, and they began to trumpet how important this was. This is before TTSA changed over into an entertainment branch, and they claimed originally that they were just studying and researching UFOs. They got two more of these UAP videos, um, and they were the primary outlet for when these videos came out in 2017. Okay. If you go forward to about October of 2017, there's a much more interesting episode. And it's one of four episodes, that if the government, if the Pentagon really wanted to come true and be honest with the American public and the world about what we know and what we are connecting with as far as what's in our sky, this event from October 2017 would be a perfect example of how they could show us what is really going on. And yet this one will not be admitted to by our government because of what I'm getting into later. You can find this event covered on a website called The Drive, all one word, thedrive.com, which normally handles high tech, sort of like a with it version of popular science. Okay. So there was this event that happened in October of 2017 where a tic tac shaped UFO appeared on California's radar coming out of southwestern Nevada in generally roughly the same area as Area 51. It's heading towards California. It's visible on radar. It's doing more than Mach 1, so it's going more than 600, 700 miles an hour. So this is definitely not a commercial airliner. It makes a more than 180-degree turn so that it's going due north. And at that point, oh, and it does that at more than Mach 1 also. And at that point, it disappears off of radar. Now, that's not tough to do because we now have stealth planes like the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning, which have these things called Lunenburg detectors. And these things are little metal brackets that are magnetically attached to the side of the ship. And they provide a surface for the civilian radar to bounce radar off of so we can see them when they're flying through commercial airspace. We don't want to have stealth aircraft that we can't see on radar flying around because the air traffic controllers may miss something and send somebody right in their path. So they hold these Lunenburg detectors on so that they can be seen in commercial airspace. And then with a flick of a button, the magnets turn off and these Lunenburg detectors fall off of the plane. And all of a sudden, poof, it's off of radar. So that in itself is not inexplicable, although it does suggest these are military or US government of some sort. So this thing starts flying due north. It's paralleling commercial traffic from California to Seattle, to Washington State. And as it's flying north, it's actually going faster than the commercial traffic. It appears off to the east, some 3 or 4 miles away, but it's still visible to pilots with 20/20 vision. They can see this thing. It's bigger than a bus. It's definitely not a normal craft. It doesn't appear to have any control surfaces. But again, at 3 or 4 miles, it might be a little hard to detect what that could be. And it continues flying north, passing commercial airliners until it gets up to around Oregon. And in Oregon, it becomes a problem because they're worried that this could be some intruder. So the military gets on a set of communications with the FAA on the pilots. And some guy who has a code word access and the code word is redacted in the communications, he orders the FAA to tell the pilots to evacuate the area, and they're going to send some F-15s up to shoot this thing down. And it turns out we don't really have a policy of how do you evacuate an area when there are commercial airliners flying through it. Do they go up? Do they go down? Do they go east or west? We don't know. We've never done this before. So at some point, they fly some armed planes into this area, at which point this thing disappears. It's no longer visible to the pilots, and it hasn't been on radar for 2 states, and it just goes away. Now, we know this because in 2018, a few months later, there is a request for the FAA tapes and the radar returns. Now, an earlier event that involved the FAA, which was the Stevensville event, which happened in, I always get
Yeah.
this number wrong, in
That was in-
2007.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, 2008. Okay, so a Stevensville UFO is seen by 300 people, and F-16s are vectored in to try to chase this thing, and it outflies them. It's obviously seen on radar. The UFO people, led by MUFON, request that these tapes are released, and the FAA lies. They actually lie in court and claim that they don't have any tapes. Then they claim, well, we have tapes, but there's nothing on it. Then they come back a third time to court and go, well, yeah, there's some stuff on it, but it's just the F-16s and they're just messing around. And the judge gets pretty mad at this point and I guess threatens that he's going to put some butts in jail if they don't come clean. And I think the 4th time they're in front of a judge, so they've lied 3 times. The 4th time they're like, okay, yeah, there was a UFO and the F-16s were chasing it. Okay, so this is the normal policy with the FAA and the military. If there's a UFO event in the area, they will claim, oh, our radar was down. The radar that is never turned off, that's on 24/7, 365. Miracle of miracles that during this time with the UFO, the radar is turned off. In this instance that happened in 2017, the FAA immediately complied. No hemming, no hawing, no lying in front of a judge. Here you go. Here's the radar tapes. Oh, and the ice cream and cherry on the top, we're going to give you the FAA communications between the pilots, the FAA guy, and the military guy whose code word is redacted. They've never done this before. And the fact that they were willing to show that our airspace not only was violated, but was so confusing that we didn't know how to tell our civilian airlines to react to the fact that there were armed, ready to shoot down planes coming into the area. It gave us a very black eye. It gave the FAA tremendous embarrassment to have to admit we didn't know how to handle this. So the fact that the FAA was willing to release this information immediately and give more than they were asked for suggests that there's something else going on. It's interesting to note that when these tapes were released in the middle of February in 2018, 2 weeks later, Vladimir Putin went on his state media channel and described how he had better than alien technology. He had stealth nuclear powered cruise missiles that could hit places like Florida. And he showed a big video of how this thing was centered on Florida. Why Florida? Well, because our former president used to have a home there, or has a home there now.
That's
And
those
it's,
hypersonic missiles, right? They call them.
well, frankly, anything that's shot into the air that's a rocket usually is hypersonic at some point. What
Right.
they're talking about ones that can cruise at like Mach 4 or Mach 5. And cruise missiles generally don't do that. Cruise missiles will usually, fly at a normal speed less than Mach 1. But he was talking about the fact that these would be stealth missiles that had a nuclear power plant, so they would never have to refuel. You could just send them up and they would just orbit the Earth forever, or over the target zone forever. The hypersonic ones that you're thinking of, those are ones that they launch primarily from bombers, but they can launch them from large fighter aircraft and sometimes things like
Carrier.
submarines and surface ships.
Yeah.
So this event that happens in 2017 looks like it was designed by the Pentagon, by our military industrial complex, to give us firsthand connections with this tic-tac shaped object, which was described just a few months earlier by the people that were involved with some of these UAP videos. The UAP videos, by the way, in no way, shape, or form support the claims of the pilots who said that they had seen a tic-tac shaped object on the surface of the water back in 2004. These UAP videos have nothing to do with supporting those stories. But because those stories involved a tic-tac shaped object, all of a sudden, we now have a tic-tac shaped object flying through our skies, which started, it appears, from somewhere near Area 51. And it elicited a response from the president of Russia 2 weeks after these tapes came out that makes them feel like they have to respond to what it seems like we have.
Yeah, there was another follow-up story from Putin and his military. They actually said they shot down a couple of UFOs or UAPs with those types of missiles. They were able to get them with those hypersonic or whatever nuclear missiles they have. They shot them down. That's
I haven't heard that. That's possible. The hypersonic missiles are a very recent thing that the Chinese and the Russians are working on. We've worked on them, but there's a real problem. When you're going hypersonic, the friction going through the atmosphere is so much that it creates like a heat bubble around the front of the object.
Mhm.
And when you do that, it makes it impossible for that object to use its sensors to see where it's going. So it has to do things like travel normally, and then it'll go up and it'll get its radar link, and then it'll find its target, and then it'll do hypersonic straight down, or it'll do hypersonic until it gets close to its target and then drop out of hypersonic so it can sense its target and then proceed. We have kind of gotten away from hypersonic rockets. We think it's a dead end, the way we've gotten away from the railgun, which we had real high hopes for. and it just seems like that's just not going to work. So a lot of the effort we put into things like the extra reactor on the new Ford class carriers, which was supposed to provide excess energy for things like electric railguns, might not be needed. It
Yeah.
seems.
What do you think? To get into this government thing, the Pentagon. We also mentioned, we talked earlier before the show. You mentioned Representative Gates, and there's also Senator Rubio. Also, that's this pushing this idea of these hearings, and that's 26th of next week. What do you anticipate? What are the politicians into this for, and what is the Pentagon? What are their roles in each one of these groups? What do they want to prove, or what do they want to? Is it disinformation or misinformation, David?
Well, I'm not in their heads, so I can only tell you what I perceive. There has been some genuine interest on the part of some politicians. The Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, has put a bill forward that has gotten some Republican support that says if there is anything in the way of retrieved wreckage or biologic materials, i.e., dead bodies, that this needs to be brought to Congress, and Congress, meaning the Senate and the House, will determine whether or not it should stay classified. That it would make it illegal to withhold that information from Congress. Now, it's been a long history where whoever is behind this information has just thumbed their nose at the government. When Eisenhower was president, he tried to find out what was going on in Area 51, and they told him, "We're not telling you." And he famously said, "I will go there with a division of
Right.
troops, and I will rip that place apart if you don't answer me, because I'm leading this country." And he was right. However, the powers that be, who are behind this cover up, and there's definitely a cover up, no mistake about that. One piece of evidence is all you need to know that there's a cover up, and that is the fact that whatever happened at Roswell caused the people who had archived all of the incoming and outgoing phone messages, telexes, and other means of communication with the Roswell Army Airfield. 6 months of that information vanished, just deleted. When something like that happens, there's evidence of a crime. There's evidence that somebody is covering up something. We don't know exactly what it was they were covering up, but there's obviously something happened in Roswell during that time period of July 1947 that our military doesn't want us to know about. Okay. Now, politicians have two goals: be reelected so they can maintain their power, and unfortunately, make money off of that.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of short-term congressmen and women in the House whose net worth has gone from less than $10,000 to upwards of $20 million in less than 4 years.
We hear
How do
that
they
quite
get
a
this?
bit. Yes, we hear quite a bit.
And one of our problems is, I know this is true in Illinois. I don't know if it's true in all the states. In Illinois, if you have money donated to your campaign and you have money left over at the end of your campaign, as long as you announce it on your tax forms as income, you can keep that money as if it was your own. It's clear that some people are doing that in Congress. They're keeping money. They're getting donations from dark money interests. And that's why some people, I won't say Matt Gaetz or anybody else is doing that to gain popularity, but they want to be in at least a limited response. They want to be responsive to what they think their voters are looking for.
Yeah, and they're wanting to be on the winning side in case this is totally disclosed with this UFOs. But also, who was this senator out of Nevada? And he was a Democrat.
Harry,
Yeah, Harry Reid. He's
yep.
the one who got involved in pushing this. So this is a bipartisan. It's not political. It seems like it's bipartisan. Both sides are wanting to get the best of this information and get it disclosed. But I don't think we're going to get disclosure. What do you think, David?
My dad wanted disclosure before he passed away. And I would like to have disclosure before I pass away, and I don't think it's going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is because if, and I'm not saying we have, if we have had to resort to lethal means to keep this quiet. One of my screenplays is called Silencers, and it deals with people that work for our government who are tasked with gathering up any information or any evidence that people might have in their possession, and occasionally to quiet people who are not supposed to talk about what they're not supposed to talk about. And if we have been doing
Could
that,
you tell us those lines? What lines do you have to cross in order for them to take attention to you? I mean, it's just like me writing my UFO book and talking about UFOs, and we're talking about UFOs. I think the line is when you mess with the military, or if you mess with one of these alphabet groups and you involve them in some kind of a scandal or conspiracy.
oh, no, no, no. The threshold is much lower than that.
Really?
They got involved with NICAP, which was the National Investigative Committee for Aerial Phenomena. My memory serves good. They involved themselves with NICAP just so they could find out what was going on with these people who were reporting UFOs and whether they were reporting military high technology or not. The problem is we've got UFO reports from the 40s that were made by experienced pilots after World War II who were seeing things that were clearly not black projects. There have been multiple times where our government and our military, the Pentagon, has claimed that what we were seeing was this object or that object. There was a famous technological project called the Aero Car that was being designed in Canada. And the Air Force claimed this is what people were seeing as UFOs, except the Avro Car. The Avro car never did anything more than hover about 2 feet off the ground.
Right.
It sounded like a million vacuum cleaners all put together. What turned out was it was a great test bed for hovercraft, and the ducted fans that you use to move hovercraft around. Great idea, works fine, but this thing never flew in the sky. And for the Air Force to claim that this was a UFO that people were seeing is just an out and out lie.
Well, back then they could probably get by with that, but my earliest UFO that I've seen was 1962 and 63. Right. So right. I know that there wasn't a whole lot of high tech stuff. And would they fly experimental aircraft over neighborhoods or populated areas, David?
Sure. We do stupid things all the time.
Yeah, I know that, but that's just like the Phoenix Lights. You know, that's a populated area.
They would not, as far as we know, put something on their craft to make them stand out and visible to an audience, to civilians. It's extremely risky to fly over populated areas. So that's why we will do most of our testing out in the desert or offshore, out in the ocean somewhere. But if you land something in the ocean, it's going to sink and somebody else might come and pick it up. So we'd prefer to do it in our own territory. So it's highly unlikely that our military would ever test something over populated area or with witnesses that can be seen.
Well, I saw this in 2011, April 9th. I remember the day. It was about 8:30 in the evening. And my mom and two brothers, they lived down the street from me. And this giant triangle craft covered 9 houses long. It was huge. And it flew about 30 feet over my head, right over my head, and clipped a tree on the other side of my road. And I asked my mom and them if they saw it. And my mom was 85 at the time. She's 95 now, 96. But she said, see it. She said, my God, it scared me to death. I didn't want to step out on the porch. I was afraid I was going to be abducted. So my other 2 brothers saw it too. So this was really low, flying about 35 miles an hour, huge craft. We don't have anything to do that, David.
No, we didn't then, and we probably do not now. Yeah. One thing I try to point out to people is that the U.S. military is never shy about sending new technology into a shooting war to test it out. A perfect example of that is the Kosovo War, where during the Clinton administration, we helped to try to keep the conflict in the Balkan area manageable and stop some of the genocide that was going on. So we used our airplanes to fly in and take out some of the larger military groups. We had an F-117 that got shot down there, partly because we weren't really aware of how its radar cross-section will be more visible when it opens up its bomb bay doors. Now we understand that, and it's like, well, we didn't know that at the time, but we were totally willing to send a 117 into harm's way, even though it technically wasn't at that time well known outside of a few close circles. The only two military people that died from the American side in that war were two pilots in the just commissioned AH-64 attack helicopter series. And we hadn't really worked out all the bugs. And one of these things crashed during that war. Those are the only two people that the U.S. lost militarily in that conflict, because we were using a helicopter that wasn't yet proven for combat. And as soon as that happened, I think there was another crash after that. They took them out of service. So we have always sent our military whatever technology is available just as quick as possible. And I guarantee you, if we had flat-sided, super Walmart-sized UFOs that could hover and take off in a split second that didn't appear on radar, we would have used them in Iraq and Iran.
Do you really think they're not withholding any back engineered equipment?
Well, okay, so we have a lot of other questions about this. It's possible that they do have other technology. The problem is the Chinese are really good at stealing anything we have. They're building a new stealth fighter called the J-20 Tiger Shark or something like that. And the J-20, except for a couple of canards, fins sticking out from the fuselage in the front, except for those, this thing looks like an exact copy of the F-22, and it looks like it's influenced by the F-35. And there appears to be a lot of technology that we pioneered that they stole in order to put it into their craft. They're really good at stealing and back engineering Russian technology, to the point where the Russians last sold them some fighters, and they sold them with weaker engines because they knew if they gave them the frontline engines, the Chinese would just back engineer it and sell it on their own. The Chinese have done that with the S-300 missile systems, to the point where the Russians don't want to sell them the S-400 because they know that they'll back engineer that and sell that too. So whatever we have as far as technology, unfortunately, time and time again, winds up in Chinese hands. So I can almost guarantee you that if we had this kind of technology, the Chinese would know about it.
Yeah.
And they'd be working on it, and they'd be showing it off, because they show off things more than we do.
Yeah. It's very confusing, David, with the politics involved, with the military involved, and we're getting information from both sides of the aisle in politics, that there's so much disinformation, misinformation, and it still goes on, and people don't know what to even think anymore. I don't trust anything, and I see this disclosure. I trust what I've seen, sight on. I mean, like you. I mean, if you see a UFO, I mean, you've seen this stuff. Well, you're already a believer. We're just waiting for them to come across in a realistic manner, either the Pentagon or the politicians or whatever. But it doesn't seem like they're in a hurry, like you're saying, that there's a reason that they're holding back. I heard one time the ETs are working with our government and our military, and also maybe with the Vril back in 1940 and 1945. They worked with Hitler. The Vril, he's supposed to be ETs, and they back engineered some stuff like flying saucers, in which I saw one in '63 that kind of looked like the old Hitler type flying saucer that you saw. But what is really going on, do you think, with all this mess of disinformation and misinformation to us? Or they're trying to confuse us, David?
Right. Like I mentioned before, this 2017 incident clearly shows that our military is involved in making us think that these Tic Tac UFOs are ones that we have created, that we're running from Area 51. They're doing that to make the Chinese and the Russians be concerned about us having technology that they don't have. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. Another thing that we're seeing is the Pentagon is trying to capitalize monetarily on the need to chase these things, to have another compartment that they can pour money into in order to investigate some of these things. Many of the Pentagon reported UFO events, especially the swarming incidents, are probably just drones that we are testing our own military by other branches of our military. The Air Force may be testing the Navy Carrier Task Force. What are you going to do if somebody sends 150 drones at your aircraft carrier? How are you going to shoot them all down? You can't shoot them down with $100,000 missiles. You might have to shoot them down with, $2,000, 1945 era pom-pom guns, the way that the German Leopard is being used in Ukraine to combat Russian drones, because they're sending up these $10,000 Shahed drones from Iran. And although Ukraine has our Patriot missile systems, those missiles cost $3 to $4 million a piece, and
What
you're
about
not going to.
these Gatling guns they have on battleships that are radar guided and they can see all these
Yeah,
targets?
point test systems. Yes, that can work too. Um, but you only have a few of those per ship. And if you're overloaded with 100 drones, you might not have time to take them all out with something like that. We need some sort of blanket area effect, maybe some type of, high technology radar gun or something that might work to take out multiple objects simultaneously. The point defense weapons are really primarily designed to take out single missiles, a couple of missiles, or airplanes. They're not really designed to take out a dozen or 2 dozen drones. They just can't acquire and take out them quite that fast. Their range is too close in. So I have a feeling our military is working really hard right now trying to figure out just how to take out those drones.
Right.
So to get back to our original question, where are we at with UFOs? How do we know if our government is telling us the truth or lying? There are 3 events in our past history where if our Pentagon, if our government and military wanted to tell us the truth, they could talk about these 3 events and not remove any classified material or dispense any uh, back engineered technology or have to compromise and say we have aliens. These 3 events, if they wanted to be honest with the American people, they could talk about right now, they could talk about on July 26th. And if they came clean with what the military was doing, we would know that there are craft here that are not ours, that are not China's or Russia's, and that we would know that they are in our skies. And those are 3 events are, let me go back to my notes. Okay, so number 1 is the Phoenix Lights. Okay, the Phoenix Lights was an event that roughly 800 people in 3 different states saw a giant chevron shaped object with bright lights on it.
Mhm.
It flew down to Phoenix, stopped, turned around, and flew back. It was seen even by the governor of Arizona, by Symington at the time.
Yes.
So the next day, he made a joke about it and had one of his staff members dress up in a green alien costume to laugh about it. Okay. The thing that's important is this chevron shaped UFO, which was massive, that covered like half the sky. This thing is not what was recorded later at around 10 o'clock. So this one happened between 6 to 8 p.m. A second event happened around 10 p.m. where there are white phosphorescent lights dropping out of the sky west of Phoenix, behind the hills that are west of Phoenix itself. Over there, there's an Air Force base. And it appears that somebody was dropping flares to make people think this was the UFO everybody was seeing. And then later on, they could go, oh, we know what that was. Those were flares. That was the military.
Oh.
Except if our military was actively trying to obfuscate what that event was, if they were obviously trying to muddy the waters about an existing UFO event within 2 hours, then there had to have been an exchange of information from Phoenix to headquarters. What do we do? And headquarters going, send somebody up and drop some flares. And that cover up could easily be proven to be the government saying, this was not our chevron shaped UFO. We don't want you to look at that. Look over here. If they could do that, it wouldn't be revealing any top secret information. It wouldn't be showing any classified documents unless they're classifying the fact that they're obfuscating UFO events.
What about the
This
story? There was a story, David, about a reporter who actually saw 2 F-16s take off, and they went after this UAP or UFO. They went
Mhm.
to take a closer look at it, and they got close to it, and they called back and they said this thing is huge, and so their commander said, "Do not fire. Return to base." What about that story? Is there any proof to that?
I'm not sure about that story, but there have been a number of events. One of the really famous ones, this is another one that they could talk about. 1975 in Tehran, Iran, back when the Iranian government was still headed by the Shah, who was a horrible, murderous dictator that for some reason our military loves, horrible military dictators. They had F-4 Phantoms in their Air Force at the time. And off about a couple of miles away from the Baghdad airport, sorry, not the Baghdad airport, the Tehran airport, there was a bright disc-shaped UFO shining a spotlight down at the ground. So the military sent an F-4 to shoot this thing down. The F-4 gets to within 20 miles, which at the time was the range of our air-to-air missiles. And as it was closing, everything on that F-4 shut off. Not just the electronics, but the hydraulics too, which are on separate systems. And this thing began to drop like a rock. The pilot managed to maneuver the plane away. And when it got back out to its 20-mile range, still dropping like a rock, bing, everything came back on like there was no problem at all.
Yeah, I heard about that.
So they sent a second one in. The second F-4, same thing happened. As soon as he got within 20 miles and was about to have a radar lock, bing, everything turned off. Except this time, the UFO sent a little red light out to chase it. And they turned away. And when it powered back up at 20 miles and it flew away, this red light went back and came back to the UFO. The next morning, they sent a group out to see where this UFO was shining a spotlight down. And according to the report, it was investigating this little old lady's garden in her backyard. That's what they were interested in. Now, we know this because this generated a report that went through channels, and we now, through a Freedom of Information Act, have this report. We know this event was reported this way. We can only assume that it happened the way it was reported. So we know that.
I got one more question to ask, and then we're going to close off this segment. We're right down to the minute. Are there ETs working with our military or world militaries?
Well, there is no, how do I phrase this? It's entirely possible. Yes, there is a non-zero chance that it's possible. There is no credible evidence so far that I've seen that tells me 100% yes. Although I have a great little story that I was told by the second in command of the Lamont Police Department near Argonne National Laboratory back in 1991 that suggests, yes, there may be. So if you want to start with that in the next hour-long episode,
we can finish talking about that. We're going to close out segment one with David White. This is Dave Emmons on the Strange Reality Show. We just finished segment one. We'll be running these, I guess, consecutively over the next few days. So just hang in there and we'll do hope you enjoyed this show. David White's got a lot more information coming up. We're going to do segment two as soon as we hang up here. Thank you. And thanks for sticking with us here on Facebook. And we'll be right back with segment two after this one. We'll air this one here soon. Thank you so much.